My name is Helen Collins. I'm 29 years old, and I work at the local library in a small town that most people probably haven't heard of. My life is simple, maybe too simple for some, but it's mine. I've always been the quiet type, preferring the company of books to the noisy outside world. The library is my safe place. It's a small old building with creaky floors and shelves that are a bit worn. But to me, it's perfect. Every day, I open the library doors at 8 o'clock a.m., turn on the lights, and breathe in the familiar scent of books. It's a routine that I never get tired of. My parents passed away when I was young, so my grandmother raised me. She was a kind woman who always encouraged me to read and learn. But she's gone now too, and I'm all alone. No siblings, no close relatives, just me and my small world. "Good morning, Helen," Mr. Jenkins, a regular visitor, greets me as he walks in. He's an elderly man who spends his days reading history books. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. The new shipment of history books arrived yesterday. I've set them aside for you," I reply with a smile. "Ah, you know me too well, dear," he chuckles, shuffling towards the designated shelf. The day goes on like this, with familiar faces coming and going. I help a group of kids find books for their school project, recommend a romance novel to Mrs. Harrison, and guide Mr. Thompson to the science fiction section. It's a quiet life, but I like it. I find comfort in the predictability, in the routine. And then one day, everything changed. The day Jack walked into my life. He came in looking for a book, but I could tell he wasn't the regular library type. He seemed out of place with his crisp suit and confident stride. "Can you help me find a book?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. "Of course. What are you looking for?" I replied, trying to stay calm. "It's a novel, The Great Gatsby," he said. "I believe it's right this way," I said, leading him to the classics section. As I handed him the book, our hands briefly touched, sending a jolt through me. It was just a simple touch, but it lingered in my mind. "Thank you, Helen," he said, reading my name tag. "I'm Jack." "It's nice to meet you, Jack." That brief encounter was the start of everything, the beginning of a love I thought would last forever, and the beginning of a journey that would take me from the quiet life I knew into a world of chaos and betrayal. If only I had known then what I know now, maybe things would have turned out differently. But life doesn't come with a warning, and sometimes we have to learn the hard way. After that first meeting, Jack started coming to the library more often. It was strange because he didn't seem like the reading type, but every time he visited, he'd ask for a book recommendation and then spend a few minutes chatting with me. One day, he walked in just as I was struggling with a box of newly arrived books. "Need a hand with that?" he offered, walking over. "That would be great, thanks," I said, relieved. As we placed the books on the shelves, he asked, "So, Helen, what got you into working at a library?" I shrugged. I've always loved books. They're like friends, you know? Plus, it's nice and quiet here. He laughed. "I can see that. It's like a whole different world." With each visit, our conversations grew longer. I found out that Jack worked in his family's real estate business. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in me. Then one day, he surprised me. "Helen, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" he asked, a hopeful look in his eyes. I was taken aback. "Like a date?" "Yes, like a date," he smiled. I hesitated. This was new territory for me, but there was something about him that made me want to say yes. "Okay, sure. I'd like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We went to a small restaurant in town. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy. We talked about everything and nothing, and for a few hours, I forgot about my usually solitary life. As we walked home, Jack said, "I had a really great time tonight, Helen. You're very different from the people I usually meet." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled. He continued, "I'd like to see you again. Would that be okay?" I nodded. "Yes, I'd like that." From then on, we started seeing each other more regularly. He'd take me out to dinner, or we'd go for walks. It was nice. For once, I felt like I was part of something more, part of a world that wasn't just about books and quietness. It wasn't long before I fell for him hard. He was charming, attentive, and he made me feel special. And when he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Looking back, I wish I had seen the signs. I wish I had known that his charm was just a mask, hiding something much less pleasant. But love has a way of blinding you. of making you ignore the warning signs, and I was very much in love, or at least I thought I was. After I got engaged, things started to change. It began with Jack's parents, who didn't approve of me from the start. They thought I wasn't good enough for their son because I didn't come from money. The first time I met them, it was clear they didn't like me. We were at their house for dinner, and I was nervous. Their home was big and fancy, nothing like what I was used to. "Helen, this is my mother, Margaret, and my father, Richard," Jack introduced. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to smile. Margaret looked me up and down. So you're the girl who works at the library?" "Yes, I am," I replied, feeling smaller by the second. Richard chimed in, "Jack, couldn't you find someone more suitable?" I wanted to crawl into a hole. The dinner was long and uncomfortable. They made it clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. But Jack stood up for me, which made me love him even more. Before our wedding, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement. They said it was just a formality. I didn't have much to lose, so I agreed without making a fuss. After we got married, I moved into Jack's house, which was actually his parents' house. They had given it to him as a wedding gift, but they acted like it was still theirs. His parents came over all the time, unannounced. They'd walk in and start ordering me around. "Helen, make us some coffee," Margaret would demand as soon as she walked in, and I would, without saying anything. I didn't want to cause trouble. One day, Margaret pointed at the TV and said, "Remember, Helen, in case of divorce, you can't claim this." It was like that with everything. They constantly reminded me that nothing in the house was mine. Jack started changing too. He wasn't the man I fell in love with. He began joining in on the jokes his parents made about me. One evening, I was trying to decide what to wear for a family event. I asked Jack for his opinion. "This one makes you look less drab," he said, laughing. I was hurt. It was like he became a different person around his parents. He didn't stand up for me anymore. Instead, he laughed along with them. Living in that house was exhausting. I felt like an outsider, an unwanted guest. I kept hoping things would get better, but they only got worse. The stress got to me. I started having bad stomach pains. I tried to ignore them, but one day I collapsed at the library. I woke up in the hospital. The doctor said it was stress-related. I was in the hospital for a few days. Jack didn't visit. He didn't even call. I felt so alone. Then one day, a notary came to my room with news. My great-aunt, someone I barely remembered, had passed away and left me her fortune, $30 million. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know what to do with that kind of money, but suddenly, I wasn't just the poor girl from the library anymore. When Jack and his parents found out, they came to visit, suddenly all smiles and sweetness. "Darling, we're so happy for you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Yes, we're family. We should support each other," Richard added. I didn't buy it. The change in their behavior was too sudden. After they left, I overheard them talking outside my room. They didn't know I was listening. "She's such a fool. Can you believe our luck?" Jack laughed. "We need to make sure she doesn't leave you. Maybe you should have a child with her. That will tie her down," Margaret suggested. I felt sick to my stomach. They didn't care about me, they just wanted my money. That was when I knew I had to get out of that house and away from them. I had to take control of my life and not be their victim anymore. When I left the hospital, I had a plan in mind. As I got home, Jack and his parents were waiting for me, still all smiles and acting like the caring family they never were. "Oh, Helen, we were so worried about you," Margaret exclaimed. I nodded but didn't say much. I needed to act normal and not tick them off. Jack came closer, a little too eagerly. "So when do you get the inheritance?" he asked. I looked at Jack, the man I thought I loved, and realized I didn't even recognize him anymore. "Soon," I said, "but it's not something you need to worry about." His smile faltered a bit. "But we're married, Helen. What's yours is mine, right?" I forced a smile. "Of course, darling." That night, I couldn't sleep. Their voices echoed in my head. Their fake concern, their greed. It made me sick. I got up and started writing. I wrote down everything they had done and said. It felt like a dam had broken, and years of pent-up frustration and pain poured out. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. I explained everything and showed him the prenuptial agreement. He was shocked but said the agreement would protect me. "You're doing the right thing," he assured me. When I got back home, I found Jack and his parents in the living room. They looked up as I walked in. "There she is, our brave girl," Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat down, clutching my purse. "I have something to say," I began. They all looked at me curious. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. The room went silent. Then Margaret erupted. "What? You ungrateful little..." Jack was on his feet. "Helen, you can't be serious. We love you." "Do you, Jack?" "Because I don't feel loved. I feel used." Margaret was fuming. "We'll sue you. We'll take half of your inheritance." I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. "Actually, you can't. This says neither of us can claim the other's property in case of divorce." They were speechless. For the first time, I felt in control. I stood up and said, "I'm leaving. I don't want any of you to contact me." I walked out of the house, their shouts and insults following me. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from their disdain and manipulation. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but it had to be better than the past. I rented a small apartment in the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I was still dealing with the divorce, but I felt like I could handle it. One day, I got a call from the lawyer. "Helen, there's something you should know about your great-aunt's will." I was puzzled. "What about it?" "There's a condition. You need to use a portion of your inheritance for a charitable cause. It was your great-aunt's final wish." I was surprised. I had no idea. The lawyer continued, "She was quite the philanthropist. She wanted to pass that on to you." I hung up the phone, deep in thought. My great-aunt had given me a chance to do something good. It felt like a sign, a push in a new direction. I started researching charities and causes. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would make a difference. That's when I found a small organization that helped women who were victims of domestic abuse. It struck a chord with me. I contacted them and set up a meeting. The woman I met, Linda, was passionate and dedicated. "We provide shelter, legal aid, and counseling to women who have nowhere else to go," Linda explained. I listened, moved by the stories she shared. "I want to help," I said, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. With Linda's guidance, I used part of the inheritance to fund a new shelter. It was an incredible feeling, knowing I was helping other women find a way out, just like I had. A few weeks later, Linda invited me to the shelter's opening. It was a small event, but the atmosphere was filled with hope and gratitude as people mingled. I noticed a familiar face in the crowd, Sarah, an old colleague from the library. "Helen, is that you?" she asked, surprised. "Sarah, it's been so long," I said, hugging her. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I told her about the shelter and my involvement. Her eyes widened in amazement. "That's incredible, Helen. I had no idea." "It's a new chapter for me," I said, smiling. We spent the evening catching up. It felt great to reconnect with an old friend, like pieces of my life were slowly falling back into place. As the event wrapped up, Linda came over. "Helen, I can't thank you enough. This shelter will change lives," she said. I looked around at the faces of the women who now had a safe place to go. "It's the least I could do," I said, feeling a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt in a long time. The days blended together, each filled with rewarding work at the shelter. I was finding a new sense of purpose, something that was truly mine. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in a while. Jack. My heart raced with a mix of emotions and curiosity. "Hello, Jack," I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. "Helen, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? It's urgent." His voice sounded desperate. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at a public coffee shop, hoping that being in a familiar place would give me strength. Sitting across from Jack, he looked different, defeated, almost pitiful. His eyes were pleading. "Helen, I made a huge mistake. I want you back. I've realized how much you mean to me," he blurted out. I looked at him, feeling nothing but contempt. "Why now, Jack?" He sighed. "My parents, they controlled everything. They were the reason our marriage failed. I was weak, but I'm different now." I felt a surge of anger. "You blame your parents? You stood by while they treated me like dirt. You laughed along with them." Jack reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Helen. I know I was wrong. I've changed." I stared at him, seeing the man he had become. I once loved Jack, but now I felt nothing for him. Whether he had changed or not, it was too late. I said, I feel nothing for you, Jack, nothing but contempt. His face fell, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man I had married, but it was fleeting. I'm sorry, Jack. I've moved on. I have a life now, a purpose. There's no place for you in it, I said firmly. He nodded slowly, a look of resignation on his face. I understand. I just had to try. Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over, truly over. The next day, the shelter had an event. A local artist had donated a sculpture to be unveiled in the garden. As I stood there, surrounded by people who supported and believed in me, I felt a sense of belonging. Sarah, my old colleague from the library, stood beside me. You've done something amazing here, Helen, she said, smiling. The artist pulled the cover off the sculpture, revealing a figure of a woman reaching up to the sky. It symbolized hope, strength, and new beginnings. Applause filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. Linda, the woman who had helped me so much, came over. Helen, this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do. I looked around at the hopeful faces and knew she was right. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it fully. My new life was busy and fulfilling. Every day at the shelter brought new challenges and rewards. My confidence grew, and for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. I even started taking self-defense classes, something I would have never imagined doing before. One day, as I was leaving the shelter, I saw a car parked outside. It was my mother-in-law, Margaret, who stepped out. As soon as she saw me, she said, Helen, we need to talk, her voice softer than I had ever heard. I have nothing to say to you, Margaret, I replied, my voice steady. Please just hear me out. I've realized how wrong we were, she pleaded. I stopped and looked at her. She seemed genuine, but I couldn't forget the past. What do you want, Margaret? I want to apologize. I treated you terribly. I've lost my son because of it, and I don't want to lose you too. You were like the daughter I never had, she said, her eyes glistening with tears. I felt a pang of sympathy, perhaps, but I pushed it away. Margaret, you made my life a living hell. An apology won't change that. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same. I said firmly, it's too late for that. Goodbye, Margaret. She reached out to me, but I stepped back. Please, Helen. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right, she pleaded. I shook my head. Goodbye, Margaret. As I walked away, I felt her gaze on my back, but didn't look back. I had learned to stand up for myself, and there was no going back. The next day, I received a letter from Jack's lawyer. He was contesting the divorce settlement. I wasn't surprised, but I was ready. I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Rachel. He's got no leg to stand on, Helen. The prenuptial agreement is clear. He's just trying to intimidate you, she said confidently. I nodded. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Let's fight this. When the court date arrived, I walked in with my head held high. Jack was there with his lawyer, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was a flash of the old Jack, the one I had loved, but it vanished quickly. The judge listened to both sides and then made her decision. The prenuptial agreement stood, and Jack's claims were dismissed. I felt a surge of relief and triumph. After the court session, Jack approached me. Helen, I'm sorry. I was wrong, he said, his voice low. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved but now felt nothing for. Goodbye, Jack. Take care of yourself, I said and walked away. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. That chapter of my life was finally over, and a new one was just beginning. At the shelter, we were planning a fundraiser, and it was taking all my attention. The support from the community was overwhelming, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the place was buzzing with energy. People from all walks of life had come to support our cause. As I looked around, I realized how far I had come, from a quiet, timid woman to someone who stood up for herself and others. Helen, you did it. This is amazing, Sarah said, coming up to me. I smiled and replied, we did it. And there's so much more to do. As the event went on, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment and purpose. This was my life now, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. Given that I'll be the primary inhabitant of our new abode, it only makes sense that the largest room becomes mine, she declared confidently. From that moment onward, she staked her claim on our new home with the assertiveness of a seasoned owner. Her brazen remarks ignited a storm of indignation within me. "Pardon me, but I'm curious, where exactly would your room be if you're so insistent?" I countered, unable to contain my irritation. Upon hearing my retort, my sister-in-law flushed crimson and launched towards me. "I'm Sophia, a 32-year-old corporate professional. George, my husband, and I have been inseparable since high school, celebrating 7 years of marriage. Perhaps owing to our extensive shared history, our relationship resembles that of an old married couple more than most couples our age. Nevertheless, I can't fathom being with anyone but George. I've always had a great rapport with my in-laws, and presently we find ourselves cohabiting for various reasons. With my father-in-law on the brink of retirement and my mother-in-law juggling part-time work, we share household responsibilities and contribute to the financial upkeep of the household." Things were cruising along smoothly until an unexpected visitor disrupted the tranquility. One lazy Sunday, as we savored the serenity of the weekend, the jeering sound of a truck reversing shattered the peace. Curiosity piqued, we exchanged puzzled glances. "Did anyone order something?" As she barged in with an entourage of movers, my heart sank. "My room's on the right, second floor," she declared, oblivious to our surprise. "Oh, and I seem to have misplaced the key. Could someone let me in?" A chill ran down my spine at the unmistakable voice. As we approached the front door, there stood Charlotte, my long-absent sister-in-law, flanked by movers lugging cardboard boxes. "Wait a moment, Charlotte. What's the meaning of this sudden appearance without so much as a heads-up? And who are these people with you?" I questioned, a mix of surprise and irritation coloring my tone. Charlotte seemed genuinely perplexed by our reaction. "What do you mean? I quit my job and found myself jobless, so I'm moving back home. Since it's my parents' house, I didn't think it necessary to inform you guys beforehand." "Heh," she explained with a carefree shrug. We stood there dumbfounded, while the movers behind her exchanged uncertain glances. "Never mind them, just get on with moving my stuff in," Charlotte instructed nonchalantly, striding confidently into our home and up the stairs. "Ha, my old room's been turned into a storage space. Get this stuff out of here." Her sharp voice echoed from the second floor, leaving us bewildered. "What do we do now?" I turned to my husband and in-laws, their expressions mirroring my own frustration. "Let's hear her out first, and then figure out a plan to get her to leave. Given her stubborn nature, she won't budge if we simply ask her to," my father-in-law suggested wearily, his demeanor suddenly aged. Reluctantly, we piled Charlotte's belongings in the hallway, buying time as we deliberated our next steps. Charlotte's petulant expression was all too familiar, her sulking demeanor grating on my nerves. "Oh, and why are George and his wife here? Are you guys crashing with mom and dad because you're broke or something?" she jabbed, her words a sharp reminder of her tactlessness. Charlotte's derisive snort dredged up a flood of unpleasant memories. She was 2 years my junior, yet my disdain for her stretched back to her high school days. Our shared alma mater was the source of our initial acquaintance. I vividly recalled Charlotte's audacious approach during our student years. "You're George's girlfriend, right? Well, since I'm your sister-in-law, why not lend me some money?" she had brazenly demanded. From that very first encounter, she had shown a blatant disregard for boundaries, addressing me disrespectfully despite my seniority. Her audacity didn't stop at her presumptuous request. She even had the nerve to casually ask her own older brother for money. My response was immediate and firm. Absolutely not. Though she bore the title of my boyfriend's sister, I refused to indulge her entitled behavior. Charlotte's reaction to my refusal was predictably disdainful. "Geez, you're so stingy," she retorted, her words dripping with disdain. "Damn," she shot me a disdainful glance before striding away. "You're the crazy one here." That encounter marked my unsettling introduction to my sister-in-law, Charlotte. As it turned out, her behavior towards her own family was even more troubling, a fact my in-laws had been grappling with for quite some time. Her tumultuous history in school was a constant source of concern, prompting frequent summons for her beleaguered parents. Even after graduating, Charlotte remained adrift, her days characterized by idleness and mischief. At our wedding, her antics reached a new low. Her excessive drinking led to a state of inebriation, during which she shamelessly flirted with any man who caught her eye. And as if that weren't enough, she took it upon herself to critique my bridal attire with a pointed, mocking remark. "That dress doesn't suit you one bit," she jeered, followed by a burst of laughter. It was a moment I'd sooner forget. Following her disruptive behavior that day, Charlotte's relationship with her own family deteriorated to the brink of estrangement. Her departure, fueled by anger, left a bitter aftertaste, yet to everyone's astonishment, she resurfaced years later as though nothing had transpired, leaving our family utterly bewildered. "It's because our lease at the old apartment was up. But our new house isn't ready yet, so Dad graciously let us stay here," George clarified, casting a fond glance at Charlotte. "You're building a house, George." "Impressive," Charlotte remarked, her tone laced with sarcasm. "When George and Sophia's new house is ready, we'll be moving out too, Charlotte," my mother-in-law stated icily. "How can you be so heartless toward a daughter who's just endured a breakup and is jobless? Is that how you define motherhood?" "Moving into George's new house signifies a fresh start for us," my father-in-law added, his voice tinged with resolve. "You've always favored George over me," Charlotte shot back at her parents, her footsteps heavy as she stormed up the stairs and out of sight. According to Charlotte, she had experienced a breakup, lost her way, and found herself returning home in search of solace. Since that day, Charlotte's presence shattered the tranquility of our family life. Our lifestyles clashed on multiple fronts. Her late-night, boisterous phone conversations with friends often sparked heated arguments between her and George. Despite shirking any household responsibilities, Charlotte never hesitated to voice her culinary preferences. "Fish? I hate them. Too many pesky bones. Can't you whip up some meatloaf instead?" she'd interject. Fed up with her intrusion, I finally confronted Charlotte. "If you crave meatloaf, kindly prepare it yourself or perhaps contribute to the household expenses. How does that sound?" Charlotte's perpetual attitude towards me only exacerbated the tension. My disdain for her ran deep, so I maintained a formal demeanor whenever interacting with her, a subtle reminder that I wasn't one of her casual acquaintances. Yet she persisted in addressing me only as "Hey" or "George's wife." In response, I resolved to reciprocate by addressing her solely as "Hey." Fully aware of her aversion to fish, I confronted her about her lack of contribution to household expenses. "Why should I chip in for my own living expenses? You're nothing but a leech, surviving off George's earnings and my family's support. Don't act so entitled." Charlotte's audacity left me speechless. "Seriously, is that how you perceive it? And how's the job search and apartment hunt going?" "Our new home is nearly ready," I countered. Her face flushed momentarily before she retorted with a smug grin. "Don't worry, I've got it all figured out," her tone dripping with self-satisfaction. In the midst of our heated exchange, my mother-in-law, Susan, appeared visibly concerned. "Sophia, dear, I'm truly sorry if Charlotte is causing you distress. Are you all right?" she inquired, her worry evident in her voice. Dealing with Charlotte had taken its toll on everyone, her stubbornness making it nearly impossible to reason with her. "I'm all right, Susan, but you should take a break too. It seems like Charlotte has gotten the wrong end of the stick." "Is everything all right?" I asked, concern evident in my voice. Susan's response was a heavy sigh. "Even her father and I can't get through to her. She just barricades herself in her room and tells us to stop badgering her. I sometimes wonder if she'd emerge if we set off a bug bomb," Susan quipped, eliciting a chuckle from me. After days of anticipation, our dream home was finally complete. George and I had poured our hearts and souls into saving for the down payment, and now the kitchen bore my personal touch, while the bathroom had been transformed into a haven for my husband's love of long baths. It truly was our dream abode. As we immersed ourselves in the joy of unpacking and settling in, the doorbell interrupted our reverie. Expecting George's parents, I glanced at the monitor to find Charlotte tagging along. I really don't want her invading our new space," I muttered, unable to suppress a grimace. Charlotte swaggered into our freshly minted abode, her demeanor oozing with arrogance. "George really outdid himself. This place is quite spacious. Nothing beats a brand new home," she proclaimed boldly. She proceeded to fling open doors to various rooms without so much as a "by your leave." My irritation reached its peak, and I was on the verge of giving her a piece of my mind when George's father intervened. "Hey, that's impolite," he scolded her sternly. Unfazed, Charlotte pouted and retorted, "What's the big deal? This is going to be my place now, isn't it?" George wasted no time in shutting down her presumptuousness. "Cut the nonsense. You don't have a room here, do you?" he snapped. But Charlotte persisted, undeterred by George's firm tone. If my parents are moving in here, then technically, this becomes their house, right? So I do have a right to be here, she argued brazenly. We stood there, dumbfounded by her audacity. It became painfully clear that Charlotte had been eyeing our home as her own from the very beginning. Furthermore, she boldly asserted, since I'll be the one spending the most time at home, the largest room here belongs to me. Charlotte's audacious declaration triggered something within me. Your room? I echoed incredulously. Let's see, shall we? With a calm demeanor, I gestured towards the storage shed outside, typically reserved for garden tools. Even if I were to go out of my way, the only space I could possibly arrange for you would be that old shed. And naturally, you'd still be expected to pay rent. Frankly, I'd rather not have you in our new home at all. Could you please leave? Charlotte's face flushed crimson upon hearing my words. Are you serious? She exclaimed, making a move toward me. Fortunately, my husband George intervened swiftly. That's enough, Charlotte, he interjected firmly. Stop causing unnecessary trouble. In stark contrast to his sister's tumultuous nature, George remained composed and level-headed. The only one he'd ever raise his voice against is this woman, Charlotte, who never seems to have any respect for her older brother, George retorted firmly. As our father-in-law's authoritative voice boomed down, even Charlotte fell silent. Charlotte, cut the theatrics and listen up. We're not moving in here, and you need to come to terms with the fact that our old home is gone, George asserted. I couldn't help but stifle a chuckle as I glanced at Charlotte, whose expression resembled that of a startled deer caught in headlights. From the outset, Charlotte seemed to assume that George and I, along with her parents, would continue living together in our new abode. However, that wasn't the case. We had been informed some time ago that our parents were planning to sell the family home and relocate to the countryside. The reason was plain and simple. We're just tired of dealing with Charlotte's antics all the time. We want to enjoy our retirement in peace, our mother-in-law had expressed her frustration. Charlotte had stormed out of their old home, declaring, I never want to set foot in this house again. I don't consider you guys as parents to me. Just disappear already. Living with Charlotte had taken a heavy toll on my in-laws. Her volatile temperament had led to numerous conflicts, some of which even resulted in legal disputes. Despite her reckless behavior, Charlotte remained unrepentant, leaving her parents to foot the bill for settlements. To cover these expenses, our mother-in-law had taken up part-time work, the financial burden imposed by Charlotte weighing heavily on the family. George and I had done our best to support them, striving to maintain some semblance of peace in our lives amidst the chaos. However, Charlotte, seemingly oblivious to the havoc she had wreaked, showed no gratitude towards her parents. Instead, she only sought their assistance when it suited her own needs. My frustration with her behavior had reached its breaking point. Then I'll just move into your new house with you guys, or I'll end up on the streets, Charlotte finally admitted, a hint of panic evident in her voice as she confronted the truth. Enough, Charlotte. The answer is a resounding no. We've tried to reason with you countless times, but you've refused to listen. Did you honestly believe we overlook everything simply because we're your parents? We're not immune to hurt, Charlotte. We have emotions too. And let's not forget your own words. You guys are no parents of mine. Just disappear already. Our mother-in-law's tone was icy as she addressed Charlotte, whose expression betrayed a mix of shock and realization. Observing Charlotte's crumbling facade, George and I exchanged a knowing glance. Dad, Charlotte's return wasn't prompted by heartbreak or job loss. Sophia and I are fully aware of the truth, George asserted, causing Charlotte to visibly pale. In reality, Charlotte was involved with a married colleague, he continued. She knew about his marital status but chose to continue the affair nonetheless. And when his wife discovered the truth, the affair imploded. Both Charlotte and her lover lost their jobs due to the scandal. They're divorced now, and coincidentally, your lover's wife, who happens to be my friend, crossed paths with me recently. Seeing her after such a long time, I was taken aback by how much weight she had lost. Enjoy your role as a homewrecker. I couldn't help but lash out. You know there's a special place in hell for people like you. Tears threatened to spill as I grappled with the weight of the situation. My husband and I had discussed it, but we hadn't broached the topic with my in-laws yet. We were afraid of upsetting them. No, it's not like that. I fell in love with him, and I couldn't help it. Charlotte defended herself with the same tired excuses that cheaters often use, her gaze chillingly indifferent. Glancing at my in-laws, I could see the fury in their eyes. Without a word, they swiftly escorted Charlotte back to their home. Later, my in-laws informed me that my sister-in-law had resorted to doing household chores in a desperate attempt to gain their approval for moving into their new home. However, their sentiments remained unchanged. "Pack your things and leave," my father-in-law repeated like a broken record. "Why?" "I've been working hard around the house. I've been doing laundry and vacuuming. What more do you want?" Charlotte finally erupted. "There's nothing special about what you're doing. It's basic self-care. Did you expect to be praised for that?" "You're an adult," my mother-in-law retorted sharply. My sister-in-law blushed, adding a layer of embarrassment to her already wounded pride. "I already made my will. All inheritance will go to George. There isn't much left because of you. You've been written out of the will. It's likely to be approved by the court," my father-in-law declared, leaving my sister-in-law visibly stunned. As my in-law's moving day approached, coinciding with my father-in-law's retirement, my sister-in-law had drastically downsized her possessions to just one suitcase. According to my mother-in-law, she had sold off most of her belongings for cash. As we bid farewell to my in-laws and turned to head back to her car, my sister-in-law inexplicably followed us. "What's the matter?" I asked, puzzled by her presence. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Please, I want to live in your house too. I'll take the small room." But more than her plea, it was the term "sis" that sent shivers down my spine. I glanced at George, and it was clear he shared my sentiments. "Hell no. Live with us. Not in your wildest dreams," he retorted bluntly as we made our way to the car and drove off without a second thought. A few days later, while enjoying the quiet day at home, the doorbell interrupted our peace. Seeing the figure on the other side, we both let out a resigned sigh. "Stop bothering us. Do you want us to call the cops?" I warned as I opened the door, only to find my sister-in-law standing there, her desperation evident as she knelt before me. "Please let me stay. I've been bouncing between hotel rooms and odd jobs, but I can't keep living like this," she pleaded. My husband and I were taken aback by the depths of her self-imposed predicament. "I don't care. We're not family anymore," I asserted, attempting to close the door. However, she clung to it stubbornly. "Just give me some money. I've maxed out my credit cards, assuming my parents would bail me out again. And I have alimony to pay, you know. If your friend is really friends with my lover's wife, maybe she could help negotiate a lower payment for me," she implored. We had no desire to engage with her, but her audacious selfishness pushed me over the edge. "Don't push me. I've never encountered someone as despicable as you. Stay away from me. I never want to see your face again," I snapped. Despite her insistence, she refused to leave. Suddenly, her face drained of color as she noticed our dogs barking from inside the house. "Wait, you have a dog?" she questioned, taken aback. We had adopted one of the 3 puppies from my parents' dog. "Would you like to see it?" I offered. Her reaction was immediate. "Who? What? No way. I can't stand dogs. You must be insane to live with one. Count me out of this house," she stormed off, her anger palpable. To be honest, my sister-in-law harbors a deep aversion to dogs. According to George, a childhood incident where a large dog playfully chased her left her traumatized, instilling a lasting fear and dislike for dogs. "Thanks for scaring off that lady, Marin," I murmured, giving our toy poodle a gentle pat. Since then, we haven't crossed paths with my sister-in-law. However, a friend mentioned spotting her in worn-out attire in a distant town. Her current circumstances don't concern me. Frankly, I hope she faces some hardships. George and I are relishing the tranquility of our new home. His parents seem to be thoroughly enjoying their rural lifestyle, occasionally reaching out through video calls and visits. They've managed to keep their address concealed from my sister-in-law, preventing any unwelcome surprises. Both appear healthier and happier, as if a weight has been lifted off their shoulders. A few months after settling into our new abode, we received a wonderful blessing. A baby is on the way. I had heard that stress could impact fertility, which may have been a factor in our previous struggles to conceive. Now, we eagerly anticipate the arrival of our newest family member next year. Gazing at George, his joy evident, I gently caressed my growing bump, filled with hope that he'll remain by my side through all our future endeavors. Amidst the jubilant atmosphere of the wedding reception, the mother-in-law took the stage to deliver her anticipated speech. However, what she uttered left the room in stunned silence. With an air of brazenness, she revealed a deeply personal detail: the bride's inability to conceive. In truth, my son knew well of her infertility, but he insisted on this union regardless. She may lack in one aspect, but she excels in her career. So begrudgingly, I consented to their marriage. The shock of her words reverberated through the hall, leaving me speechless in their wake. How could she so callously reduce a woman to her reproductive abilities and then flaunt it before our gathered guests? Oblivious to the distress she had caused, the mother-in-law surveyed the room with a smug expression, unaware of the discomfort her words had wrought. In the hushed aftermath, my name, Catherine, seemed to echo with a weighty significance. A 31-year-old professional in the dynamic realm of product development, I thrive in my career, contributing to several successful projects. Despite outward contentment, there's a secret burden I carry, one I dare not share with anyone. 5 years ago, I received the crushing news. I was infertile. The revelation left me reeling with shock and despair. In those dark days, I grappled with feelings of worthlessness and the loss of hope for any semblance of a future. Even my then-boyfriend couldn't weather the storm, ultimately ending our relationship. Overwhelmed by sorrow and frustration, I threw myself into my work, seeking solace in its demands to drown out the relentless echo of despair. Looking back, I realized I was merely evading reality, clinging to the refuge of productivity to shield myself from the painful truth. Yet amidst the turmoil, a glimmer of hope emerged. Through unwavering dedication, a product I poured myself into became a resounding success, elevating my standing at work. Convinced that marriage was now beyond my grasp due to my infertility, I resigned myself to the solitary path of societal contribution through labor. Then, a serendipitous encounter altered the course of my destiny. In a routine meeting for product development, I crossed paths with David, a man my age from a client company. Little did I know he would become the harbinger of change in my life. David, the son of his company's president and head of the planning department, and I swiftly exchanged contact information. Initially, our interactions were confined to professional matters, but gradually, our conversations transcended the confines of business, blossoming into a romantic connection. In David, I discovered an unexpected reservoir of love and kindness that I had long deemed unattainable. However, the specter of my infertility loomed large, a secret I dared not disclose for fear of losing him. Yet, as our relationship deepened, the weight of my silence grew heavier, gnawing at my conscience. How could I keep such a fundamental truth from someone who regarded me with unwavering sincerity? Uncertain of the outcome, yet determined to be transparent about my condition, I braced myself for the inevitable. Summoning courage, I disclosed my infertility to David, fully prepared for the possibility of his departure. Despite my resolve, anxiety gnawed at my insides as I broached the subject. To my astonishment, David's reaction wasn't what I anticipated. Tears welled in his eyes as he offered me solace, expressing gratitude for my honesty. His unwavering kindness moved me to tears, etching the moment into my memory like an indelible mark. Contrary to my fears, our relationship only flourished after that pivotal conversation. 2 years later, on a momentous evening at a restaurant, David presented me with a small case, unveiling a ring that glittered with promise. "Catherine, will you marry me?" His unexpected proposal ignited a whirlwind of emotions within me, joy mingled with apprehension. "David, are you certain? I can't bear children. Can you truly accept that?" Though David comprehends my predicament, the weight of marriage introduces a new dimension of uncertainty. I couldn't readily say yes to his proposal, burdened by doubts. "It doesn't matter, Catherine. I want us to navigate life's challenges together, to weather every storm side by side," David reassured, acknowledging my concerns with unwavering support. In that poignant moment, tears flowed freely, a testament to the emotions swirling within me. Since the day I received my diagnosis, I never envisioned this future. Yet in David's unwavering love, I found the courage to embrace it. With certainty in my heart, I'd accepted his proposal, ready to face whatever lay ahead, as long as we faced it together. "I share your sentiment, David. Thank you for your unwavering care. I'd eagerly anticipate the journey ahead of us," I replied, gratitude laced in my words as we embarked on the path to wedded bliss. With the proposal accepted, we wasted no time in setting the wheels in motion for our impending nuptials. As a woman in her 30s, the prospect of becoming a wife ignited a sense of urgency within me, eager as I was to intertwine our lives officially. Funny how swiftly one wishes to hasten time once the promise of matrimony is extended. The reality of marriage loomed closer, heightening my anticipation with each passing moment. However, before exchanging vows, we had to confront a significant hurdle: meeting David's parents. While our encounters with them had been brief in the past, this meeting carried weight as we prepared to divulge news of our engagement. Unfortunately, the reception of our impending union was far from smooth sailing. While David's father greeted the news with joy, his mother maintained a stern countenance throughout the exchange. When the moment came for her to express her thoughts, her opposition to our marriage was palpable. "Catherine, I cannot condone your marriage to David," she declared, her disapproval evident in her demeanor. Perplexed, David interjected, seeking clarity. "Why?" he pressed, prompting his mother to elaborate. Fixing me with a steely gaze, she broached the crux of her objection. "Your inability to bear children," she stated bluntly, laying bare the very fear I had hoped to avoid. Though prepared for reproach, the directness of her words pierced me deeply, leaving me momentarily speechless. "You comprehend, don't you? David is poised to inherit the company. It's only natural that we expect his wife to bear an heir. Marrying someone incapable of fulfilling that role is out of the question," she asserted, her tone unwavering in its refusal to accept our union. Aware of David's imminent ascension to the helm of the family company, I understood the weighty expectations placed upon him, particularly the desire for him to produce an heir. Yet David's proposal to me had been made with full knowledge of these circumstances. While the prospect of not having children with him weighed heavily on my heart, our decision to marry had been a mutual one, made despite these challenges. Thus, his mother's words struck a painful chord within me, their sharpness magnified by the stark reality they laid bare. "It was me who insisted that it didn't matter," David interjected, his defense of me unwavering. "Please, mother, refrain from laying blame on Catherine. Our choices should not be disregarded in this manner," he implored, coming to my defense when words failed me. Even David's father, visibly perturbed by his wife's harsh words, expressed his discontent. "How could you utter such words?" he admonished her. Despite their protests, his mother remained resolute, her stance unchanged. "I speak the truth," she asserted defiantly before excusing herself from the table, signaling an end to the discussion. Although our conversation yielded no resolution that day, it failed to shake our steadfast commitment to each other. Determined to formalize our commitment despite his mother's resistance, we opted to register our marriage with his father's blessing. Recognizing that waiting for her approval might indefinitely delay our union, we took the decisive step forward. "My mother's objections hold no sway over us," David assured me. "I'm the one who desires this marriage. Let's remain patient. She'll come around eventually." Thus, David and I became husband and wife, yet his mother remained steadfast in her refusal to acknowledge our union. "I'll never accept this. I refuse to attend any ceremony," she declared adamantly, escalating the tension further. In light of her unwavering stance, we postponed the wedding ceremony, clinging to the hope of winning her acceptance before celebrating our love publicly. Day after day, his father endeavored to sway her opinion, while David and I persisted in our appeals, pouring our hearts into each plea. Despite our efforts, her resolve remained unyielding. In a bid to soften her stance, my parents also visited his family numerous times, joining the chorus of voices imploring her to reconsider. Even some of David's relatives weighed in, urging her to embrace our union. Finally, after an onslaught of earnest appeals from all quarters, she relented. At long last, we could proceed with the wedding ceremony, our hearts brimming with gratitude for the collective efforts that led to this moment of acceptance. Despite lingering discontent, David and I pressed on with our wedding preparations and finally settled on a date, marking it a year from the day we officially registered our marriage, effectively our inaugural wedding anniversary. As the long-awaited day approached, a palpable sense of relief washed over us, culminating in the arrival of our wedding day itself. Filled with an overwhelming mix of emotions, I stood on the brink of tears, elated at the prospect of finally donning the wedding dress I had nearly abandoned. It felt surreal, like the culmination of a cherished dream. The ceremony unfolded seamlessly within the sacred confines of the church, setting the stage for a joyous reception. Surrounded by the warm embrace of well-wishers, I found myself enveloped in a cocoon of happiness. It was all thanks to David, whose unwavering support had guided me through moments of doubt and self-doubt, reminding me of my worthiness of love and marriage. Watching David, resplendent in his finery, exuding an aura of strength and reliability, filled my heart with an indescribable sense of contentment. Yet, as the festivities progressed and we prepared for a brief interlude, I caught sight of his mother ascending the stage, evidently seeking permission to address the gathering. And thus she embarked on her own discourse. "Thank you all for joining us in celebrating my son's wedding today," began the mother-in-law, her words slicing through the air like a chilling wind. "The truth is, the bride is unable to conceive, and I've harbored reservations about their union from the start." Her words struck me like a thunderbolt, freezing me in place as I contemplated the audacity of her disclosure on this joyous occasion. The once lively atmosphere in the venue dissolved into a stifling silence. "However," she continued, undeterred, "my son was adamant, and so I reluctantly acquiesced to their marriage." In the midst of the hushed hall, her voice resonated with a chilling finality. Despite David's attempts to intervene, his mother clung to the microphone, forging ahead with her tirade. "You see, I may never have the joy of holding a grandchild in my arms. Can you fathom such a sorrowful predicament? Truly, I fail to comprehend his choice in a partner like this." Stunned by her relentless onslaught of cruelty, I struggled to find my voice as David grappled with his own emotions beside me. Then, with a callous laugh, she delivered the final blow. "Yes, as you can plainly see, my daughter-in-law is barren, but she's successful in her career, so I reluctantly consented to their union. Ha ha ha." Her laughter reverberated through the hall, a bitter echo of her disdain. As her gaze bore into me, she delivered one last venomous barb. "You ought to be grateful. This day owes its existence to me." With a smug satisfaction evident on her face, the mother-in-law resumed her seat. Her disgraceful speech concluded. Had there ever been a more offensive display? Stunned into silence, I scarcely registered the murmurs swirling around me. Urged by David and the venue staff, I was guided out of the hall, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and indignation. Once inside the dressing room, the floodgates of suppressed emotions burst open. Anger, sorrow, a profound sense of disappointment at the desecration of our long-awaited ceremony. Each emotion crashed over me in relentless waves, threatening to engulf me entirely. I never want to lay eyes on that woman again. I refuse to share a space with someone so callous, I declared, my voice trembling with raw emotion as I shed the wedding attire, opting instead for the comfort of my own clothes. "This is enough. I'm going home," I announced to David, my resolve unyielding as I stormed out of the dressing room, my footsteps echoing with determination. "Catherine, please, just wait." David's pleas fell on deaf ears as I hastily hailed a waiting taxi at the venue's entrance. "Take me home," I instructed the driver, my voice laced with a fervent urgency. Humiliated and incensed by my mother-in-law's public humiliation, all I desired was to escape from the scene of the ordeal as swiftly as possible. Our new home, just a brief 5-minute drive from the wedding venue, provided a sanctuary amidst the storm of emotions that engulfed me. Stepping across the threshold, the floodgates I had desperately held shut burst open, tears streaming down my cheeks unchecked. Never had I imagined I would endure such cruelty on what should have been the happiest day of my life. The joy of yesterday had swiftly transformed into the bitterest despair, leaving me reeling in disbelief. It wasn't a choice to bear my infertility, let alone to have it laid bare before a crowd of onlookers, especially on such a sacred occasion. As I struggled to compose myself, David entered. "Catherine, I'm truly sorry. Please forgive me. I never anticipated my mother's hurtful words. I'm sorry I couldn't shield you from her cruelty." David's voice was laden with remorse as he bowed deeply before me, seeking my forgiveness. He explained that as the groom, he felt powerless to confront his mother's deplorable behavior. Aware of David's inherent decency, I harbored no ill will toward him. It was his mother who bore the blame for this affront, not him. "Please, Catherine, let's return to the wedding. I've asked my father to keep my mother away from the venue. They're occupied with the guests during the dress change, and we still have time to salvage the reception." I refused to let this day end in ruin, David implored, his earnest plea reaching me through the haze of my turmoil. I nodded in acquiescence, choosing to place my trust in David's assurances. I couldn't bear to inflict further pain upon him, my staunch supporter and understanding companion. Moreover, the thought of tarnishing the reception we had meticulously planned together weighed heavily on my conscience. Offering David my apology for hastily retreating, we embarked on the journey back to the venue. In the taxi, our hands intertwined, a silent vow passing between us to weather this storm and see our wedding reception through to its rightful conclusion. Upon our return to the family waiting room, we found my mother-in-law surrounded by relatives, her exhaustion palpable as she bore the weight of their collective reproach. Catching sight of my presence, she approached me with an air of contrition. "Oh, Catherine, I'm terribly sorry. Can we simply pretend that dreadful incident never occurred?" Her voice took on a pleading tone, her head bowed slightly in a gesture of supplication. It was a stark departure from the smug countenance she had worn at the reception. "Why? How can you even suggest such a thing after the humiliation you inflicted in front of everyone? How can you expect us to simply forget?" My anger flared in me with her audacity, her attempt at reconciliation ringing hollow in my ears. The notion of forgiveness felt like an insult after the disgrace she had wrought. Why seek forgiveness now when you never truly accepted me to begin with? If you were so opposed, why not simply let things be? I voiced my refusal to acquiesce to her plea, my resolve unyielding as I prepared to return to the ceremony. "Don't be like that. I'm apologizing, so why won't you forgive me?" My mother-in-law's words hung in the air, laced with frustration and confusion. "I had no idea that one of your relatives was a key client of our company. It turns out, my maternal uncle oversees a significant client of my father-in-law's company. While I was away, he gave mother-in-law quite the dressing down. He even hinted at severing the business transaction. Thanks to my father-in-law's desperate apologies, the situation was barely kept under control. In that moment, clarity dawned upon me like a sudden revelation. Mother-in-law's apology wasn't born of genuine remorse but rather self-preservation. I was rendered speechless by the realization of her motives. It was then that David, who had observed our exchange in silence, finally interjected. "Mom, is that your idea of an apology? Aren't you disrespecting Catherine too much? And you're apologizing to her simply because you were reprimanded by a client?" David's voice, usually calm and composed, rang out with an uncharacteristic edge of frustration. My mother-in-law, taken aback by his sudden outburst, stared blankly in response. "Do you comprehend the magnitude of the pain you've caused Catherine, Mom?" David's voice rang out, filled with a raw intensity that echoed through the room. "You exposed her most sensitive issue in front of everyone at our wedding. As a human being, that's the lowest of lows, regardless of the circumstances. It's inexcusable. You casually brought up someone's health struggles like it was nothing." David's words surged forth, an unrelenting torrent of pent-up emotions directed squarely at his mother. He spared no detail, laying bare the hurt she had inflicted upon me, time and time again, wielding my infertility as a weapon. Today's egregious display at the reception had been the final straw. David's gaze bore into his mother with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. "I'm through with you. Consider yourself disowned if you can't accept Catherine as my wife. That's your issue to grapple with. Your words hold no sway over us. Our family's affairs are no concern of outsiders." With unwavering resolve, David severed ties with his mother in a single, decisive proclamation. There was no ambiguity in his declaration. He wanted no part in her life from this moment forward. As far as he was concerned, she was no longer his mother. "David, please, don't say such things. I want to celebrate with you. Let's not dwell on anger, all right? I won't utter another word. Let's try to salvage the mood and enjoy the rest of the wedding together, shall we?" His mother's complexion paled at David's words, her attempts to gauge his reaction met with futility. Despite her frantic efforts to placate him, it was evident that nothing she could say would sway David's resolve. "Today isn't just about me, it's about Catherine too. We're a team. We're inseparable. Disrespecting Catherine is akin to disrespecting me. I understand that you have no desire to celebrate our union, so I suggest you leave now." David's tone was unwavering, his words cutting through the air with an icy precision. Her apologies rang hollow. Mere attempts at self-preservation devoid of any genuine remorse towards me. David, with a merciless resolve, ordered her to depart, asserting that I was his sole family. "I can't believe this, David," his mother murmured in disbelief, her expression a mixture of shock and bewilderment. Clearly caught off guard by her son's unequivocal rejection, she found herself standing alone, alienated by David, me, David's father, and the rest of the relatives. With no allies left and facing the harsh reality of her situation, she reluctantly conceded defeat, her only recourse being to retreat from the scene. Once she had departed, I swiftly changed into a fresh dress, taking David's hand as we made our way back to the venue, united in our resolve. Though they remained unaware of the turmoil that had transpired, the guests greeted our return with a warm round of applause. It was evident that they had sensed the gravity of the situation and graciously awaited our return. I was deeply moved by their understanding and grateful for the comforting embrace of their warm reception. With my mother-in-law absent, the wedding reception flowed seamlessly. As David and I prepared to deliver our closing remarks, we took a moment to extend a heartfelt apology for the disruption caused earlier. With that, we successfully wrapped up the festivities without further interruption. True to David's resolve, we made the decision to cut all ties with my mother-in-law. David changed his contact details, ensuring no further communication could reach us. He even suggested we relocate, despite our recent settlement into our new home. Recognizing David's unwavering determination, I agreed to the move. The relocation expenses were graciously covered by my father-in-law, citing the troubles caused by my mother-in-law. With his support, we swiftly made the transition to our new residence. Once our move was finalized, my father-in-law took decisive action and served my mother-in-law with divorce papers. He too had grown weary of her mistreatment towards me, and the incident at the wedding was the final straw. Although a sincere apology managed to salvage our relationship with our uncle, who also happened to be a business associate, he had reached his limit with my mother-in-law's behavior. Consequently, she was expelled from the family home, left to forge a solitary path forward. Since David and I cut ties with my mother-in-law, we've been left in the dark about her whereabouts and well-being. From what we've heard through whispers and hearsay, it seems her disgraceful behavior at the wedding left her with no familial support. She's said to be enduring a solitary and difficult existence, scraping by in a modest apartment and working multiple part-time jobs from dawn till dusk just to make ends meet. Meanwhile, David and I are relishing in the tranquility of our married life. Though we hadn't been blessed with children, we find solace and contentment in our companionship. We're confident that as long as we continue to cherish and support each other, our bond will only grow stronger with each passing day. With this unwavering belief, we face our future hand in hand, filled with hope and anticipation for the life we're building together.